As Nigeria begins the COVID-19 immunization rollout following yesterday's receipt of 4 million doses, 3.9 million, Astrazeneca vaccine, the federal government says it will do everything possible to ensure that the vaccines do not end up in the wrong hands. According to the Minister of State for Health, Dr. Olorunniyi Mamora, all vaccines arriving in the country must come in through the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Abuja, with any other routes considered illegal.
Is bringing the 3.9 million Oxford Astrazeneca vaccines from the COVAX initiative has just touched down here at the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport. And this is an exclusive on Arise News because there's no any other media house that is covering this live. Others are just getting shot, but we can tell you that that is the plane that is currently taxiing right now. So the vaccines are here.
It's been just over a year since Nigeria recorded its first case of the coronavirus. But Tuesday marks a happier milestone. The first vaccines, which were supposed to arrive in January, have finally arrived. But now that they are here, there are some concerns about whether people will take them. Nigeria's information minister says work has been done to ensure that the shots are accepted by the community.
We're expecting about 60 million doses from COVAX. We have just about 4 million today. Now, I want to take the opportunity to again reiterate that if these vaccines were not safe, we would not touch them. We have enlisted the support of traditional rulers, governors, political elites, and everybody to please promote this vaccine and convince Nigeria that this vaccine is not safe, we will not bring them. And we are going to live by examples.
It had been predicted that Nigeria would suffer a high number of deaths from the pandemic, but the fatality rate in the country is less than 2%. Over 1,900 people have so far died from the virus. Nigerians are being reassured that vaccines are safe and would lower this rate even more.
I want to assure Nigerians that this has been the border for all of us that are in the health industry of this country. An effort is already being made to handle this. At least I can assure you that down to the states, we have cold chain. In some selected local government areas, you also have. So what we are going to do is that the areas where we have the cold chain down to the state and local government, we will put them there and move people to that place.
There have been concerns about Nigeria's capacity to store the vaccines at the required temperatures. But officials say that everything is now in place.
There's no shadow of that Mr. President and the Vice President will be taking the vaccines. We're trying to schedule that. Potentially this will be Saturday. Once we get confirmation based on their schedules, we've been able to procure enough cold chain equipment that will ensure that every single political ward in Nigeria has the solar direct drive refrigerator which can store these AstraZeneca vaccines within +2 to +8 degrees Celsius.
The arrival of the vaccines have brought hope for many. But this first batch is only enough to inoculate 1% of Nigeria's population. But people are being urged to stick with restrictions to stop the virus from spreading.
Don't congregate in large numbers because those massive events are super spreaders. And as much as possible, except it is very expedient, don't travel.
The vaccines might be here now, but injections aren't expected to start until Saturday, when the rollout will be kicked off with government leaders and health workers. It's hoped that 70% of the population will be inoculated by the end of next year. Amaka Ude, Arise News, Abuja.
Right, great report there from Amaka Ude. Tunde, we'll come straight to you on this conversation this morning about the vaccines. Finally, they're here.
Yeah, it's great news. It was really good to see. I hope this is the beginning of the end. We're certainly not at the end. Look at the sobering news coming out of Brazil this morning that yesterday they had their single highest number of deaths since the beginning of the pandemic. 1,641 people died in one day. And this is a country that has begun their vaccine rollout. There have been questions about the pace, but at least they've begun. And look at what they're still facing. So we all need to understand that the vaccines are here, yay, but we must still pursue the non-pharmaceutical measures of social distancing, hand hygiene, and the all-important face mask. But, I was always interested in how Nigeria would approach this, and now we're seeing it. They're going to start with government and political, sort of cultural leaders, and then health workers as well. And I think that's the sort of reassure people, because I think if Nigeria had started off vaccinating health workers like they did in America, or the older demographic like they did in England, everybody would say, well, those are your guinea pigs and you want to kill them off. So I think it's important that our leaders are seen rolling up their sleeves in public. It should not be done behind closed doors like Donald Trump and Melania Trump did. We need it to be televised with our major figures rolling up their sleeves, getting vaccinated to encourage people in this journey. Now, all we can rely on COVAX for at this point is to vaccinate 20% of the population. So we have such a long way to go. So we all do need to wait patiently for our turn, and in the meantime, keep up with the measures. But this is good news. It's a good start. And thank you to COVAX and to the Indian government, who is also donating 100,000 vaccines to Nigeria.
All right, Dr. Abati.
Well, first, as the Secretary to the Government of the Federation said, it's a significant development that at last we have received the first batch of vaccines in Nigeria, making Nigeria the third country to receive vaccines from the COVAX facility. And then again, after several promises, end of January, end of February, we were given all kinds of dates by the Presidential Task Force, although they claimed that it was beyond them when eventually the vaccines will arrive. But yesterday, the vaccines arrived, even if many Nigerians are concerned that a reception ceremony had to be organized to receive the vaccines. They probably only just stopped short of declaring Astrazeneca or having musicians on the bandstand. But I guess it's okay, even for the officials themselves, to be excited that they've been able to reach this point. A number of points that have been made by the authorities. One, we're told that the safety, the efficacy of the vaccines that we've been given will not be a matter of presumption. NAFDAC, the Food and Drug Administration Commission, we're told will take the next 2 days, today and tomorrow, to double check and make sure that the vaccine, the Astrazeneca vaccine, is safe for inoculation in Nigeria. And we hope that they will really do that. What we've also been told is that on Saturday, the president and the vice president will be the first to take the vaccine as part of an attempt to build confidence among the people. The third point that has come out also is that, well, despite the vaccine, people should still also follow the basic protocols. This is not, an excuse for people to now start holding large gatherings and, not following the guidelines. Now, they have two strategies, a 5-level strategy which they call TEACH, T-E-A-C-H. And then they also say the rollout will be in 4 phases. We're hoping that the electronic register that they have pointed out, how many Nigerians have access? Because there's an e-portal that they have announced. Now, how many Nigerians have access to that? And how are we going to accommodate people in the rural areas? I think that is also important, because that's where the majority of our people are. And as I said yesterday, they need to do a lot in terms of advocacy, in terms of communication, to address the issue of vaccine hesitancy, because I've been hearing many Nigerians insisting still that they will not take it on the basis of the say-so of state officials.
Speaking of the e-portal, I did a registration yesterday for the vaccine and I never got a mail back.
Neither did I.
Very sad. So it makes 2 of us. All right, that's all on news headlines. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have Ruth Sadiri, Michael Wilson, Adesu Amora, Aaron Akernia, and the teams talk about Africa's global business, COVID-19 supporting activities across the globe. Stay with us. All right, welcome back to the Morning Show right here in the Rise This channel. Rotus, let's go to you this morning. Let's talk some business, Rotus. Good morning, how are you? Hi, Rotus.
We kick things off in Kebbi State. The central bank governor, Godwin Emefiele, was in Kebbi State, in Zoro, in Kebbi State, for a launch of the 2020 wet season harvest aggregation, also 2021 dry season input distribution under the CBN Anchor Borers program in association with the Rice Farmers Association of Nigeria. And he was stressing the need to increase our food reserves. I have to say, the central bank governor has been very busy. Remember last week, he he was at the Dangote refinery. Then he was at the Bankers Committee meeting talking about growth in the economy. Now he's in Kebbi State, stressing the need for increase in food reserves and also talking about the benefits of the Anchor Borrowers Program, which has, of course, was launched about 5 years ago. They financed about 2.9 million farmers to try and get a boost in food reserves across the nation. Kebbi State, remember, last year there was a bad flood that knocked out about 15-20% of their output for rice. So he was talking about how COVID-19 has stressed supply chains and led to a lot of countries being very protectionist when it comes to food. And he's talked about how he wants to make agriculture a viable employment output for the country. Talked a lot about food reserves. That was his main issue that he was stressing, and also talking about the need for funding for our farmers and the importance of Nigeria to be able to feed itself. And of course, Rufai, I know, has talked a lot about yield per hectare when it comes to our output. So that's something that has to be looked at. He also talked about the loans that have been given to the farmers, and the fact that this, central bank is aware that there's, as far as collection is concerned, is something that they are on top of. So it was really important for him to be there and for him to also talk about the need for agriculture as to be, as one of Nigeria's most important sectors of this economy. It was, very important for him to be there and stress that what Nigeria does need to increase its food reserves. To another matter of automobiles, if we look at open market operations by the central bank, they are looking to phase out foreign portfolio investors once their current debt stock of automobiles has been phased out. So if you think about open market operations, they are liquidity management tools. If the three of us have money in our hands, the central bank can offer us OMO bills, which will yield interest. We give it to them, and then we earn interest. What the central bank has done is taking the money out of our hands and giving us interest in return. The thing is, these OMO bills, particularly in foreign exchange, were kind of in addition to liquidity management, they stabilized FX, right, for us, because these were foreign portfolio investors were taking advantage of them and doing something called a carry trade. Carry trade is where you take funds from a low interest rate environment and take it to a higher interest rate environment, and you earn the difference. So these foreign portfolio investors were coming from their own countries where interest rates are much lower and earning higher interest on these open market operations. I think it's the director of monetary policy at the central bank, Mr. Mahmood, if I remember correctly, was talking to media and saying that the debt burden has gotten too high. If you take a look at a chart here, let's look at this OMO sales chart comparing January, February of last year to January, February of this year. Okay, so anyway, I'll just give you the figures. The chart shows that between January and February of 2020, about 3 trillion naira in OMO bills was issued. That's now reduced between January and February of 2021. It's reduced to 1.6 trillion naira. So about half has been reduced. So what central bank is saying is that it's costing them too much money to pay out interest on these OMO bills to foreign portfolio investors. It looks like the impact of this is that perhaps federal government bonds and treasury bills might now return to being the interest darlings of investors once this is phased out. But I think the calculation is that there's about 40 billion or so dollars in total of issued OMO bills, and 1/3 of that is being held by foreign portfolio investors. So it's something that the central bank wants to reduce. They didn't give a time frame, though, as to when that's going to happen. To the Securities and Exchange Commission, their Director General, Mr. Lamido Yuguda, he was at a webinar where he was talking about, again, reiterating the threat of Ponzi schemes in Nigeria, saying that the COVID-19 pandemic, the low interest rate environment, loss of jobs have led to an increase in Ponzi schemes. This is something they've talked about over and over, but at this webinar, they were just restating it once more, that this is the issue that they've been facing in the country, and Nigerians have to be alert. To South Africa. South Africa is facing, I think, their third fuel price hike in about 3 months. And it's very interesting. Tito Mboweni, the finance minister, mentioned this in his February 24th speech. The latest hike in fuel, I think it's about 63-65 cents per litre, is gone into effect as of midnight of last night. I want us to take a look at this road accident fund. Very interesting here. Look at that. The road accident fund provides compulsory cover to all users of South African roads, citizens and foreigners, against injuries sustained or for death arising from accidents involving motor vehicles within the borders of South Africa. Whether you're a foreigner or a citizen, there's indemnity insurance. How is this thing funded? One of the main funding mechanisms for the road accident fund in South Africa is from a fuel levy. Take a look at this chart here. There's a chart that shows, if at the bottom right, you can see the road accident fund. You can see the arrow going to the South African Revenue Service, the equivalent of the FIRS in Nigeria. They remit money to them, and then it goes to the National Treasury. Essentially, the road accident fund is funded by levies on fuel in South Africa. I understand about anywhere from 20 to 25% of the total cost of fuel that South Africans pay for fuel goes to levies. There's also a carbon tax levy that has to be increased. We know that South Africa has faced a lot of issues with respect to COVID-19. They have to get funding somewhere. And it's interesting, they're also facing electricity price hikes as well. So it's very interesting to see the similar circumstances that we're facing in Nigeria and also South Africa.
I mean, that's a lesson we should learn from. That's governance in action. And that's what you get when you have something like Tito Mboweni there. You're taking those funds, you're putting it into an insurance scheme, the money still plows back into the economy. The reason why a lot of people, always shout at a levy hike in Nigeria is because they are not seeing the resultant effect. Money has to go through a cycle. There's something called a cycle of money. It has to go to you, then it has to come back to me one way or the other. So when I pay tax, it has to come back to me one way or the other in infrastructure. And that's not the case, and that's why it's difficult to raise limit. Now the South Africans know what that hike is going towards. That's really, really exciting prospect. Good one for the CBN governor. I'm excited about what they're doing in KB. See rice prices for the first and the last time. But the question is, are we producing enough rice to meet local demands and not even talk of exports? 2, are we ensuring the security of rice farmers? Because most of the rice farmers, what they do is they produce the paddy and somebody comes to process it. So are we ensuring the security of the rice farmers to even churn out the paddy in the first place, and off-takers come and refine the paddy and turn them into rice? Because I got a call recently out of Niger State about a woman telling me that some bandits came and they said, you know what, process 20 bags of rice, just drop it on the farm and go. So a lot of smallholder rice farmers are still suffering. And this anchor borrower scheme goes to a lot of big holder rice farmers. It's a good initiative, but we need to produce enough rice to eat here and churn out.
I'm still waiting for the report on the effects of the border closure on rice production. I'm still waiting for that to have been backed by data, because you recall that policy was controversial, to say the least. So that's my contribution on that. We do need to boost our food reserves. We all agree with that. But I want to know how that particular measure worked out.
Well, in South Africa, it's not as if the people are very happy with the steps that have been taken. The levies, the carbon levy, the road accident levy, they're separate from the fuel hike that has occurred. And the argument is that the fuel hike is a benchmark to the spot price of oil, and that is inevitable. The Automobile Association of South Africa is saying that at a time when unemployment rate is high, inflation is high, electricity tariffs have gone up, that it will amount to imposing greater hardship on the people. My fear, is whether or not there could be some kind of social tension on account of this increase that we have seen in fuel price. However, if you look at what they've done in South Africa, the minister, Tito Mboweni, has been transparent enough. It was first on February 24 that he served notice of what was going to happen. But what are we doing here in Nigeria? We're still applying subsidy that we say does not exist. There's so much opaqueness in terms of how government is handling the situation. Finally, quickly, on the CBN, I think what the CBN has been doing is commendable, but the CBN governor talked about food reserves. The national grains reserves of Nigeria, as at December, was down to about 30,000, which is really very small for a population of 200 million people. But then you have security challenges, and you have issues in terms of, farmers and herders conflict.
And we must solve the problem of food sufficiency in this country, but we have to move on to Business Update with Michael Wilson after this quick break. All right, welcome back. Still the morning show right here on the Rising Channel. We'll go over to Michael Wilson, and he joins us from London this morning. Great to have you, Michael.
Morning, good morning, good morning. A lot of noise continuing in the financial markets this morning. A lot of energy, I think, being wasted between global recovery hopes and asset bubble fears and inflation and all the rest of it. Central banks remaining as they always do on message about dovishness and so on. Across the world, employment remains very much, though, on fiscal policy support. I think that's the most important thing. Some countries can afford it, some can't. In Asia, including China, domestic demand, quite cautious, limits to how far those economies will actually recover whilst international borders remain closed. I think the vaccine, of course, is the clue to all this, as it always is. So as far as Asia markets are concerned, US vaccine manufacturing process spilled over, and then also an impressive Australian GDP data print actually lifted most of the animal spirits today. That signalled on Wall Street, that signalled Asia to follow suit. Regional equity markets doing quite well. Nikkei up about 0.25%. China, Shanghai Composite up 1.5%, and Hang Seng rallying to the same amount. Interesting story, I think, from Ant Group. You remember Jack Ma and Ant Group, won't you? And the fact that the Chinese authorities pulled his IPO. So some of the employees actually wrote on the office notice board, "So, Jack, what are you doing about these shares that you gave us that we thought that would actually be able to profit from during the IPO?" And apparently its executive financial chairman has said that we're actually going to monetize them for you. So I'm assuming what that means is that Ant Financial will be actually giving some of its employees money back. But actually what the detail of that is, who knows? US recap, helping along the background, therefore, to that. And the US stimulus bill probably going through, but I would caution, it still has to get through the Senate, and this is where there's still going to be problems. So many people in the United States saying, when's that $1,400 going to arrive in my back pocket? Well, not right now is the answer to that. A lot of people are actually trying to put a date on it. I suspect we'll have to wait till it actually goes through through Senate rather. Thanks in part to, now the market's doing quite well. Federal money is allowing J&J's arch rival Merck to start manufacturing again. J&J's one-shot COVID-19 vaccine simultaneously. So the inflation genius sort of popping out again. We're going to get ADP figures today. We'll get the weekly jobless figures tomorrow, and then the big one on Friday. Will that actually sort of fuel up inflation worries? Very possibly. Let's see what actually happens. Wall Street, very hard to call, quite honestly, depending on whom you actually believe. Now, EU. Let's turn our attention to that which is relatively close to us and which we used to belong to at one stage. It faces a double-dip recession. Here's what's going on. The attitude to EU vaccine policy is actually dividing very, very rapidly indeed. So many countries are going to China and Russia for their vaccine. They've given up hope of the EU actually agreeing on vaccine at the moment. Spanish unemployment 5-year high. German retail sales down 4.5%. Result of all this is that the ECB have lowered their growth forecasts, and everything points towards a double dip recession as far as the EU concerned. This country, the UK, the only game in town is the budget. Is this the road to recovery? That's the real question. A real tax tightrope, actually. Got to increase taxes, and yet many of the population cannot actually afford to pay higher taxes. So there's that actually there. Will there be short-term? Yes, we know that. There's a £20 billion structural hole there. We know that the furlough scheme is going to extend until September. State aid jobs. Pensions, will there be an attack on those? Green economy, zero-sum green economy, do you think? There's a big conference going on here at the end of the year. The actual costs, though, of everybody going green, everybody, for example, imagine this, converting your household boilers, because we need boilers here, because it gets very cold, as you know, in this rainy little island. And are people going to actually convert to that by, in 10, 15 years' time? How expensive is that going to be? I would suggest very expensive indeed. The golden prize from all this is more jobs and more productivity. We'll see how it goes. Commodity, we got OPEC Plus coming up, as you know, that's tomorrow. There will be a reduction in production cuts that will actually affect the oil price. That's why it slipped very, very slightly in trade. And gold, where it clings on to a modest recovery, but really gold's out of it right now. Many other things actually appealing to investors. So gold prices to 1738.50 overnight, but 1700 an ounce really is what we're looking for. That's what the market's taking for you. That is your global view. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And yes, we'll all be tuning in this afternoon when the Chancellor presents the budget. And speaking of the Chancellor and Parliament, what are your thoughts on Lord Hill's review, trying to assure a place for the City of London going forward? I'm really interested in the fact that one of his recommendations is that every year the Chancellor should address Parliament on the state of the City of London, just so that London doesn't slide behind Amsterdam, as it already has done in January, as Europe's top trading hub. What are your thoughts on all his recommendations and his ideas?
I think that what he's going to do is to try to, as you say, reinforce London as being a good place to start to have tech IPOs. There've been very, very few. That'll be number one. Secondly, we've talked about these things called SPACs before. I have to say, I feel as though they are sort of in bubble territory, but not for me to say, just as an observer. That's all. That's something else that could happen in London. None of those funds actually happen in London right now, blank check funds. There's a lot in New York. It may be, as far as the Chancellor talking about the City of London, well, he can. I suspect that probably volumes speak a lot more loudly than any Chancellor's speech would do. Yes, Amsterdam got its increase in volumes, certainly, and other markets as well. Luxembourg too, people like that, people like Dublin as well. I think he's got to be, the Chancellor today has got to be very careful not to increase business taxes too much, because what we don't want to lose is our advantage in being a lower tax economy, which is good if you want to attract businesses. We'd still be at 25% corporation tax. We'd still be below the major members of G7. I don't think that's saying a great deal, actually. I think the time is now for tax reduction, but that is not going to happen. He'll signal that. The question is, what other tax increases will he actually signal? So Lord Hill, from one point of view, he'll quote that report this afternoon in his speech. I think it's quite constructive that a rescue mission appears to be hoving into view for the City of London. I don't think it needs it, actually. I think we'll go our own way. Europe may get the equity volumes. Well, good luck to them. It doesn't really matter where this stuff's traded from. Provided there is execution that people trust, then that's the key to it. And that certainly puts London ahead of anywhere else in the world, marginally apart from New York, I suppose.
Well, for me, I think you've made the key point about corporation tax, which is the fact that with unemployment rate at about 5.1%, in the UK, and also, the follow scheme being extended, I imagine that what may happen at 12:30 GMT when the Chancellor goes to the House of Commons, he will give some, he will take some, because he needs to fix public finance, as he has said. But if the corporation tax is high, then of course the real thing to worry about is the implication in terms of investment. Will more investors want to come and pay business tax in that environment? But you mentioned Jack Ma. For how much longer will he continue to suffer? There is a report that he's no longer the richest man in China. He's now number 4. Do you think that he will get some kind of relief at some point with the authorities, weighing heavily on his businesses through antitrust legislation?
Not sure that whether he is or is not the richest man in China is the issue. I think what he's done is he's clearly demonstrated to people who are interested in this, and particularly outside China, what you can do and what you can't do. And what you can't do is run a kind of business that Ant Financial has become, which I've said often in the past is bigger in terms of turnover than the central bank in China. That's what the authorities don't like. So it's indicative to people outside China of what the authorities there will do. That if you get too successful, it's like the tall poppies. Off come the heads, figuratively speaking, metaphorically, of course, not physically. But I think that's the problem. So that a lot of employees, as I said this morning, are actually saying to Jack Ma, hey, come on, you gave us equity in the company, assuming we'd get an IPO. We didn't get an IPO, so what are you going to do to monetize that? So I think this story actually goes about, he's not actually spoken up at all. We saw him briefly surface before Christmas when he talked about education, which we reported on at the time. But actually, in terms of where he's stands as far as the China authorities are concerned, don't know. And it'll be down to him to raise himself. But I would have thought he's on fairly difficult ground as far as the authorities are concerned. And quite honestly, that what China's throwing out is this view that I don't think many people actually like very much. They're saying, well, you know, we want to be successful in business. You know, if there's a richest man competition, I want to be that richest man. But the government's not allowing me to. The government in China is not allowing me to do it. I do find that rather strange.
Okay, I want to talk about recovery. Philip's curve, according to The Economist, always, plots this graph of high unemployment numbers against reduction in wage rates. Are you going to see? Are you, waiting for that phenomenon to occur in the UK economy? Because most economies in Europe now is over 5% unemployment rate, and when the economy starts to recover, they will pay lesser wage. Is there anything the UK government is doing to buck that trend when it happens? Because it's going to be a
I said that the golden thing about any road to recovery is to increase jobs and increase productivity. You put your finger on it. The problem is we do not know what the true rate of unemployment is in this country because there's a lot of state support going to people who are not working. So how does that figure? Will they have jobs to go back to? Nobody will really know. What he's doing is, in the short term, the Chancellor has said he's going to extend the state support for people who are unemployed and for their businesses, until September. Well, we'll see then. So that basically is kicking the can down the road. As far as wage elasticity is concerned, I feel as though if there are fewer jobs, and there certainly are fewer jobs at the moment, I think wages probably will decrease slightly because there's no need to pay a lot of people if there are crowds of people coming to be employed, which of course there will be. I mean, I've got friends who work in the city and they get thousands upon thousands of applications from people who have big degrees and all the rest of it, stand no chance of getting a job at all. So that's really going to be the function. I think if we're still, and I hope we are still talking, in the autumn, in September, then we'll get a realistic view of what the true level of unemployment is. And then the arguments about what those wages will be will come to the fore. Until then, we just don't know.
Will also Zoom and working from home, bring about that wage elasticity? Because a lot of people, like you were saying, some of your friends in the city, I say, no, there's no point going back to work. Pretty much people work from home. And that will also shrink in the wage system and make people poorer in the long run.
The good doctor raised this yesterday, and he's absolutely right. He quoted Goldman Sachs, didn't it? The governor of Goldman Sachs saying, oh, yes, of course people will go back to the office. Listen, if you're the governor of Goldman Sachs, you have a chauffeur-driven car, takes you into the office, no problem at all. If you aren't that, but you're working for a normal small company, not a Goldman Sachs, I think you'll be thinking very much about whether you actually want to get on a crowded train or into a car, into crowded commuter situations with people still not being vaccinated and still not sure about whether they should be wearing masks or not. So all that's got to happen. If you do not go into the office, I think you miss a very, very important part of growing up. You rub shoulders with strangers. That's the first thing you do in your first office job. You've not met these people before. You work out how people work. As I said to you yesterday, you copy what they do. These are essential growing things. If you want to be the chief executive of a company, you have to go into the office to see how things work. You cannot be doing it from home. But lots of people will. And so far, where we stand right now, remember, we're standing in the middle of the foothills of recovery right now. We're looking at people, and every survey says that more and more people actually want to work from home. If you're a boss, you do not want to work from home. If you're a boss in your own company, you want to be going into your company. And I think if you're a beginner in an industry, that's where you need to be.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Michael. We'll leave it there this morning. I'll come back to you tomorrow. Right, for updates on COVID-19 pandemic, Adeso Omoro is always here to do a wonderful, stellar job. But that'll be after a quick commercial timeout. All right, welcome back. For updates on COVID-19 pandemic, Adeso Omoro, triumphalism, I call it. The vaccines came in yesterday.
Surely historic moment for Nigeria, Rufai, yesterday. I think that every Nigerian should be excited that at least it's a drop in the ocean for what we need, but at least it's a start. Good morning, guys.
Morning.
Let's go very quickly to look at the global figures to have a direction of what the pandemic is saying at the moment. Almost 300,000 infections were recorded yesterday across the globe. Unfortunately, another 9,292 deaths were also recorded globally, bringing the total to the figures you're seeing on the screen, according to the Johns Hopkins tally. Now, here in Nigeria, 79 new cases, of COVID-19 infections were recorded in 22 states in the last 24 hours. The largest infections came from Lagos State, which is the epicenter of the pandemic in Nigeria. Lagos saw 153 cases yesterday. And as promised, indeed, Nigeria's first COVID-19 vaccines, the Oxford Astrazeneca shots from the International COVAX facility, arrived in Abuja a little before noon yesterday. You guys discussed this already on the news segment, but in earnest, the race between infections and injections is about to commence in Africa's most populous nation. Rollouts are expected to begin on Friday once NAFDAC gives a go-ahead. But there are still some unanswered questions, such as what will be the decentralized approach to states? Not much has been said about that. Which state is getting what? We do not know at the moment. And would the federal government be providing technical assistance to states? For most countries, this unprecedented vaccination has been a logistical Rubik's Cube. But the Nigerian authorities continue to assure that they've got this under control, they've got this covered because they've had past experiences with mass vaccination. But time will tell. At least 3 other African countries also got their vaccines yesterday, including the DRC, Angola, and Kenya. So it's great news for Africa. Away from that, in the face of growing vaccine nationalism, one country is showing that it doesn't necessarily have to be so. Almost 30 years after war started in the region, Serbia has donated 5,000 vaccine doses to Bosnia. This is to allow for the neighboring states to launch its inoculation efforts. Now, the Bosnia Croat Federation, which is one of the 2 autonomous regions in Bosnia alongside Serb Republic, has ordered 1.2 million doses from the International COVAX scheme and another 900,000 doses from the EU, but none of this has arrived. It is threatening to sue COVAX and the EU, but there you see President Alexander Vučić of Serbia arriving in person yesterday to donate these 5,000 jabs, and he promises that another 5,000 will be sent to Bosnia. Bosnia has recorded 130,979 cases and 5,000 deaths so far in the pandemic. Let's go to the U.S., guys, where President Joe Biden has said that the U.S. is expecting to take delivery of enough coronavirus vaccines for all American adults by the end of May. This is coming 2 months earlier than anticipated. Now, it is largely due to the authorization of a third vaccine, which is the Johnson & Johnson, and a truly historic move brokered by the Biden administration, I must say. This move will see 2 pharmaceutical intense competitors work together to produce COVID-19 vaccine. Now, drug maker Merck & Co., who had to discontinue its own vaccine production because of unimpressive phase 1 trials in January, is now having to work with Johnson & Johnson to produce, to ramp up production for the U.S. I think this is great. This is fantastic. But despite this laudable developments in the U.S., we're also seeing governors who are saying they have to open the economy and they have to relax curbing measures. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas says that the state will open 100% by March 10th, and Mississippi Governor Reeves says the state's mask mandate would end on Wednesday. Also in the U.S., reports are now emerging that former President Donald Trump and his wife Melania secretly took COVID-19 vaccines in January, but we're not sure what particular jab they took. But as of January, the U.S. had authorized the Pfizer-BioNTech and the Moderna vaccines for emergency use.
Well, quickly, let's start with Nigeria. You're right, we discussed it earlier under the headlines, but the concern that you have expressed is something that the Secretary to the Government of the Federation tried to address yesterday when he said that they will be fair, the government will be fair in the distribution. And we hope that indeed there will be fairness. Because you recall that last year, I think March 2020, when the Jackman Foundation donated test kits and masks and ventilators to Nigeria, I mean, there was, a lot of, frustration with the way that was distributed. Some states of the Federation got more than Lagos in terms of what was sent to Lagos. And people were asking the question, shouldn't the epicenter of the infections in Nigeria be the states to get more of the donated items? Now, this time around, we hope that the governors will be involved in mapping out how the distribution will be, and that the distribution will be data-driven, either now or later. In other words, it will relate to the level of prevalence in each of the affected states. Otherwise, you have a situation whereby these vaccines could be distributed and it will be collected by states that claim that they don't have COVID-19, or it will end up in the warehouses of politicians, thinking that it's a material that can be used for election purposes, whereas it is very obvious that that is not the purpose. In other words, what we're saying is that this should not be politicized, because the vaccination process should be about human lives, should be the safety of everybody. As for Serbia, Serbia is acting in enlightened self-interest. But what we must note, of course, is that since the 1995 Dayton Peace Accord, Serbia has been at peace with its neighbors, whether it's the two federating territories by its border or the other countries within that region. But you see, of course, that what they have done, why I said it's in enlightened self-interest, the Bosniak Croat Federation, the territory, is just, it's a neighboring country. Yeah. And if the two countries are, at peace with each other, then it means, of course, that you have to protect your interests even across the border. And that's precisely what it has happened. And we hope that, the sustainable peace that we now see in that region would further deepen solidarity, cooperation in the face of this global scourge. And I hope Israel can learn a lesson from the example of Serbia. Israel is even an occupying territory, and it continues to violate the Fourth Geneva Convention with regard to the management of the COVID pandemic.
Israel has finally made a concession to vaccinate Palestinian workers that are working within Israel's territory, which I think is just so shockingly low as far as standards go. So they need to get this memo from Serbia. But if we're looking at data, is Lagos really the epicenter? According to the seroprevalence test, which Rufai insisted on until he got it, Lagos and Enugu have the same rate of infection. So that needs to also be looked at very carefully, because the data that we've been working on has proved to not be entirely accurate. And about President Trump and Melania, I mean, it's so important for leaders, I was saying earlier, to be vaccinated publicly, should be televised, to encourage people. I think President Trump did what he did and went the cowardly route that he did because he didn't want to sort of let the side down. He's a strategic politician and he always has to appeal to his base, many of whom are in the holy water will solve our problems camp. So that's probably why he did what he did. But it's completely wrong. Others should not follow suit.
I mean, the world have seen Trump for who he is and what he is now. You come out and you tell your followers, don't take the vaccine, it's evil. You go in the corner, in the private, and you take the vaccine. So I'm sure the world can see Trump for who he is now. He doesn't really love his supporters. He doesn't care about them. Two things I want to talk about. Number one, let us be careful. There's a new Brazilian strain. It has finally emerged that the reason after 70% of people were infected in Manaus and they thought herd immunity will have happened, and it didn't happen, was because there was a Brazilian strain that kept on affecting people and the infection rate continued for COVID-19. So let's be careful of strains. It has to be reiterated. And secondly, religious groups should be careful. The Catholic churches in St. Louis, Missouri, are saying that people should not take a certain vaccine because, it was, some abortion cells and the likes were put in those vaccines. And the Pope said, take vaccine. So some religious leaders are going against what the Pope is saying, and they are saying people shouldn't take vaccine. We should be very careful in the world as it is today. We are all fighting one enemy, and that's COVID-19, not ourselves. But thank you so much for your time at this one.